Hello again. Well, we're now 5 weeks in. By the time you'd be seeing this one, 5 weeks. Why, where's the time gone? It's exciting. I've been really seeing some new stuff that I think is just great. Chapter 4, which I believe is where we are tonight, talks about the budgeting cycle. Well, actually, it talks about a great deal more than that. We will get into that at great length on Monday. But it starts in a good place. It starts with the Chief Fiscal Officer. Believe me, that is a very, very demanding job. Never had one, don't want one. Part of it is because you are never dealing with just one budget. You are constantly dealing with a number of budgets. The three that you're most familiar with are the operating, the capital, and the special projects. But you could have any number of grants, and as the fiscal officer, you are the person responsible for at least riding herd on the people who are actually directly responsible. You're constantly taking a multifaceted view of the world. You have to look at where you were, where you are now, and where you plan to go. So it's past, present, and future. It's very, very interesting. Let's take a look at the three elements that enter into almost any budget building and operating procedure. The first, of course, is the culture of the organization. As was said in the book Animal Farm, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And clearly, when you are dealing with a unique and special culture for every institution, Orwell was very accurate. The culture determines who gets what and how much of what, who is accountable and to what level. The second thing, of course, is we're constantly playing with, as I said, we're constantly reflecting back on where we were. We look at the time that we face, and it breaks down, in most instances, very efficiently into quarters and then annual, and then sometimes, depending on what state you're in, 3 or 5 years. Quarterly is when most of your accounting subsystems say you'll get a semi-official report. Some do it in thirds, but most of them do it quarterly. Then you have, of course, your annual budget, which the budget year we've talked about, January to June, October to September, July to June. It depends on essentially what kind of budget you're talking about. And the 3 or 5 depends upon what kind of capital budget does your capital funding agency want you to use. That can be, as, say, for example, the case of Morgan, it's a bipolarity. You have the Board of Governors of Morgan. They have to kowtow or work with what the state of Maryland uses. The private school up here in Hagerstown deals with whatever fiscal year the corporation, Gannett Enterprises, uses. That's for the Washington Post. It's for them. It's for everybody. The third one, of course, is the participants. And you have two types. We've talked about this before. You have the internal stakeholders, and you have the clients and the, if you will, contributors from the outside. When you talk about participants, about the only thing new in that chapter is the idea of selecting who plays what role. At a small community college like Hagerstown, for example, pretty much everybody can have a role. In fact, most people are encouraged, if not coerced, into having a role. Now at Morgan, a school roughly, as I think I said, better than 3 times the size of Hagerstown, there's just not enough room for everybody to come around the table. That makes the people in charge of various elements of the budget charged with a far greater responsibility of both communicating to and listening to the people who are not around the table. This idea of a timeline and active communication is very important because not only does it give you a universe in which to operate, but if alterations are needed, where they will occur will be based on that timeline. Take a look at page 90. You'll see some interesting development strategies for the budget. And again, those strategies will be driven in no small part by the operational dates that have been set on your timeline. The text talks a little bit about general guidelines. Who's involved? What elements comprise the process? Why do we ask to have things presented in the way we have them presented? And finally, what constitutes an acceptable, complete rationale for what is being done? Another thing that is important is the degree to which you have mobility within that budget. Now, what does that mean? How much can you move, and from where to where can you move it? Most of the budgets I'm familiar with, most of your line items are relatively flexible. You can move things around. Sometimes they will put a percentage on how much you can move. There's usually a time after which you can't move. It's usually the last six weeks to month of the budget. They would like things to stay stable. That's been my experience. Maybe you've had other experiences. We'll talk a little bit about that on Monday. The other thing, though, the two that in general are not often mobile are equipment above a certain amount of money. Now, some say that's splitting hairs. If it's below that amount of money, it really isn't equipment, it's a material of instruction. You'll have to look at the institution whose budget you're evaluating, whose budget you're contributing to. And the other one, of course, is personnel. In general, you are not allowed, once the budget has been declared final, to move around personality too, whatever. A couple things we're going to look at. I'm glad the text introduced them. They say there are some critical elements that go into getting ready to build a budget. And the first one is a favorite of mine. It's environmental scanning. I will have a very short handout for you on Monday, something you can skim very easily in class. And so we all at least singing from the same sheet of music. Then we're going to look at a short set of PowerPoint slides that really help you understand some of the things that you look at. Now, what are the basic things that you're looking at just to get you thinking about environmental scanning? What are those things out there that we know have the greatest probability for change? You always have to be careful with personnel. Every school I've ever worked with, every school I've ever accredited, had a model by a certain date, by January, by April, by July. You were expected, encouraged to turn in a retirement if one planned to retire. And yet, basically, I've yet to see a school hold to that hard and fast. What are some of the others? How about fuel costs? They're almost like riding a roller coaster these days. How about food costs? Every time we have too much rain or too little rain, a hurricane, a flood, food costs tend to vacillate, if you will. The other one that is always very interesting when you try to plan is what should we talk about for a rate of inflation. Right now, that's not been a big issue. Quite possibly, it could become a big issue again. So we just keep that in the forefront of environmental scanning. From that environmental scan, from your looking at past and present, will emerge a set of guidelines for budget building. I said a little bit earlier that it's critical for the person who is doing the input to the budget, if some of her or his staff are not, that they must work extremely efficiently so that there are no difficulties, so that the guidelines are understood and accepted. Look at pages 95 and 96, and you'll see some good elements. The next thing we're going to talk about is something called what-if scenario building. It's in the book. Talked a little bit about it. I have a handout for you. Again, it's brief. Won't take you long to scan it. And then you will be able to look at the PowerPoints and bring some order out of chaos. One of the things when we talk about budgets, surprises in general don't make anybody happy. One thing I will never forget, we were taking the budget to its last, thank God it was the anti-penultimate moment, was going to the management team of the institution. One of the senior administrators came in. When it came his turn to talk, he said, "I'm firing so-and-so." What? You're doing what? That was a total shock because there's a procedure, wasn't being followed, so that had to be turned off. Okay, a couple quick things. Final submission. In higher ed, it usually is 2 or 3 to various identified groups. In K-12, at least my experience with K-12, we'll ask our colleagues in class, very often there are any number of public presentations because it is so much closer to the taxpayer. And the last thing, of course, is monitor, 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 so that you can freeze at some point if necessary. You can cut, that's much more serious, or if things are looking good, as I said in the last presentation, there may be some reallocation within the line items. See you Monday, looking forward to it.